Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Antonio Gomez. I work for the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support here at ISU. I'll be your moderator and technical support. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll make sure to take care of it. Please hold all questions until the Q&A portions of this webinar or post the questions in the chat. We do also have a Q&A function if you would like to use that where we can track questions a little bit more easily. So we're happy to take a look at that and answer any questions that you have. I can also unmute you if you need, so raise your hand if you have a question, and we will unmute you when the time comes. This webinar also offers closed captioning, so feel free to turn that on. This webinar is also recorded, just so you know. A recording and all materials will be available within 2 business days on the Illinois Workforce Academy. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Andy Blanke.
Good morning. My name is Andy Blanke. I am a data strategist at the NIU Workforce Policy Lab. I've helped the Department of Commerce with several forms of research and analysis regarding the WIOA Title I program. In particular, I've developed the statistical adjustment model and the WIOA Title I participant dashboard, which will be the subject of this webinar. So before we dive into the data, I'll give you a quick background on how this dashboard came into existence. So it initially started with a request from the Chicago-Cook County Workforce Partnership. They wanted to know some more information about who are the participants in their WIOA programs, what types of trainings are going to lead to the highest paying job opportunities, and what are some of the barriers their participants face. And as we were putting together the data for that request, realized this is information that could be useful for all 22 workforce boards. So that's how this dashboard came about. And in addition to the Cook County feedback, we also got feedback from our statistical adjustment model, technical advisory working group, and from the continuous improvement accountability committee for the Illinois workforce investment boards. So a lot of people have provided a lot of feedback to get us to this dashboard where it's at. So now let's walk through how to access it and what information is included in it. So the dashboard is available at bit.ly/Title1participants. I will type it into the screen share so you can see it. So it's Title I participants, one as the word. So the first few pages are preamble about what the dashboard is, who to contact it. I'm not going to belabor this part of it because I'm walking you through this now. But to navigate the dashboard, there are 2 ways you can go about doing so. You can use the navigation panel at the bottom of the screen where these arrows on the bottom will move you forward and back 1 page at a time. If you click on the bottom center of the page where it says 2 of 21, that will bring up a table of contents where you can skip ahead or behind 1 page at a time. And then there's also an index page where this has a list of all the pages and what is included on each one. So this is going to be a helpful tool for navigating instead of going 1 page at a time in a 20-page document. So this dashboard has information by workforce board, by individual county, and by different workforce programs. But you might not find data for some selections. So if you try to select an individual county for an individual year, there might not be enough data to show. We tried to protect the privacy of participants in the WIOA programs as we built this dashboard. So if you're trying to select an individual county over a small time frame and you're not seeing anything, then it might help to make a broader selection. For example, in Adams County, if we just look at people that were in there for a few months, there's not enough data, but if we go farther back, there is enough data to show. Where there's also might be some difficulty if you're trying to select individual counties within a workforce board. So for example, if you're trying to get people that lived in Peoria County and access services through LWIA 1, there will not be enough information to show. So just be aware that the county where your participants live might not be the county where they access services or vice versa. So if you're really interested in data about just who lives in a particular county, I would suggest including all workforce boards. If you're interested in a particular workforce board, then you can just select that board. Now, by selecting dates, you have a few options. You can use the slider bar to change the dates when the time frame starts and ends. We have data for 2017 through 2024. You can enter your dates in the calendar view. So you can select from a calendar or you can just type in the dates. So that's three ways that you can get data for a given time frame. Now note that the dates that appear on the calendar is going to be every date that physically was on the calendar for those years. It's not necessarily dates where American job centers were open. So if you're selecting data for a Saturday or a federal holiday, there might not be any data associated with people who entered on that date, but it's still shown on the system there. And that's also why sometimes along the top of the screen where it shows the dates here, that might not correspond to your selection if you selected a date that happens to be a federal holiday or a weekend or some other date where the American job centers were not open for intake. But on this page, we're showing how participants' race and ethnicity are captured within the WIOA Title I program. Oh, actually, before we do that, I should take a step back and say one of the goals of this dashboard is to try and improve how participant data in the WIOA program is collected and processed. Another goal of the dashboard is we want to try and help local workforce boards understand the impact of their programs on their participants, the communities they serve, show the impacts on particular target populations. And then we also hope this dashboard might be helpful to identify where there might be potential gaps in accessibility, inclusion, and responsiveness within the program. So all in all, this dashboard is meant to help make your participant data easier to understand and easier to work with so you can see what's going on at a ground level with your participants. So on this page, we're showing how race and ethnicity are being captured within the WIOA data system. We have Hispanic ethnicity separate from race because they are considered separately in the data collections. So somebody could identify as Hispanic or not Hispanic while also identifying a race category. So this top bar is just showing the racial categories for people who identified as Hispanic. The gray bar is going to be those who did not identify a race. And a lot of cases, if somebody did not identify a race, it's because they identified as Hispanic and that they already thought that they answered the question by providing that. That's an issue that we also see in the census data collections. There are a lot of cases where somebody reports as Hispanic, then there might not be data for their race and ethnicity. The bar on the bottom is going to be race reported for those that did not identify as Hispanic. Now, these bars do not total up to 100% of your participants because someone could identify as multiple races. So this is just a simple count of how many times each box was checked for a racial or ethnic category. The green boxes on the right side are going to be for the population that is American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. And the reason why we have these populations called out on the side is because we do have data on them, but it's usually too small to display on a bar graph or some other chart. So it's still a population that matters in the program, but it usually is a small percentage that does not display well in chart form. So that information is available if you're trying to fill out something like a grant application and want to know how many of these populations are being served and it doesn't show up on the bar graph. That's why we include that count that way. And this information is available specific for the different WIOA Title I programs. So it can be for adult, dislocated worker, or youth. The reason we have them broken out across three different selection panels is because of co-enrollment. So somebody could be enrolled in both the dislocated worker and the adult program, as an example. So, for example, there were about almost 600 that were co-enrolled in adult and dislocated worker. So that's why we have to include those there. I wish there was an easier way to do this, but unfortunately, we have to do that as three separate selections. So that's some information just about how race and ethnicity characteristics are captured within the WIOA program. If your enrollments, they seem to be different from what's reflected in the data. It could be that some elements are not being captured at intake. But if you're not seeing a lot in this gray bar for race not identified, that's usually a good sign because it means your participants are disclosing that information. And this information is available both for the previous page was enrollments. This one is exits. So everyone in the program has an enrollment date. Not everyone has an exit date. So that's why we have those separately. In addition to data on race and ethnicity, we also have information on various target population characteristics or on different barriers to employment. So on this page, we have some counts of total enrollments by different types of barriers within the WIOA system. So if you mouse over each of these icons, that gives you how each of these barriers are defined within the WIOA program. And these descriptions were adapted from the participant individual record layout technical documentation by the Department of Labor. So this description, that is how we are supposed to identify somebody as having a disability or having cultural barriers or being identified as homeless in the data collection system. So disability status is closely aligns with the Americans with Disabilities Act definition. So it can include mobility issues, cognitive difficulties, chronic illness, or hearing and visual impairments. Another example is cultural barriers. This is people with attitudes, beliefs, or customs that they think might make it difficult for them to find and maintain employment. So mousing over each of these icons will show how the barriers are defined, and you can see how many of your participants in your area over a given time frame fit into each of these barriers. At the statewide level, the most prevalent barrier is those with low income, and this can overlap with some of the other barriers. So these counts of participants, they're not going to add up to your total number of participants because the barriers can overlap. Somebody could be unemployed for more than 27 weeks, and they could be a veteran, and they could be homeless, as an example of that. So our hope for this page is that this can help you show the impact of your workforce programs by showing how many people are being served with different barriers. So you can see how many of your participants were veterans, how many of your participants were unemployed for more than 27 weeks, how many of your participants are still learning the English language, how many of participants are returning citizens. These are some of the barriers that are reflected within the WIOA system, and these are the people that are going through your programs. So the previous page was showing enrollments by the different barriers or target populations. We have the same information available for exiters. Again, they do not total 100 because some people can have multiple barriers. This information is also helpful for showing which types of barriers to employment are most common within your program currently. Another goal of the participant dashboard is to try and identify potential gaps in accessibility, inclusiveness, and responsiveness. And one aspect of that is, are participants receiving and completing training at comparable rates by their race, sex, and ethnicity? So not everybody that goes through the WIOA program receives intensive training in the program. Some people go through the program and they only access career services. So this bar graph on the left is looking at how many participants that went through the program received training. So if the program is accessible, we should expect to see similar bars across each run. So we're seeing that about 70% of participants receive training. And then of those that complete their receive training, about 80% will complete that. So this information is available statewide and for individual workforce boards. So an example in the Rockford area, LWIA 3, we're seeing that about 60% of participants receive training, and then of those that complete their of those that receive training, about 80% completed those. So this bar graph is helpful for seeing at what rate are people receiving training and at what rate are they completing training. Now, something really of interest for the WIOA program, which we don't have a lot of data on, or at least we don't have as much data as we would like, is occupational outcomes. So WIOA program is all about getting people into high-paying jobs, promoting social mobility, and the type of job that people end up in has a lot to do with that. What type of job somebody works in will say a lot about their earnings potential and their social mobility. But unfortunately, the information on exactly what type of occupation people have once they exit the WIOA program is a bit limited. So we know a lot about what industry or what type of business participants work in because that's based on a match to the unemployment insurance wage records. But in terms of occupation or what the specific job responsibility of the participant is, that's a bit more limited because that requires follow-up by the career planner. It requires the participant to answer a phone call or some other form of follow-up communication. So on this page, we're seeing what type of occupation did participants have prior to entering the WIOA program. And we're seeing that of those that did have an occupation prior, the most common category was production occupations. So these would be probably people that are team assemblers, somebody at a manufacturing facility. Second most common category was office and administrative jobs. Then the third category was transportation and material moving occupations such as warehousing. But by far the largest category was those that did not have an occupational code prior to employment. So this could be people that were unemployed for a long time. This could be youth who are just looking to start their career, so they did not have a job prior to that. Or it could be people that did not know how to identify their previous job. In any case, there's a lot of data missing on what types of jobs people had before they entered the program. This information is available statewide or for local workforce boards. So, for example, in DuPage County, it looks like management occupation was the largest share of prior jobs of those that had a job listed. So that previous page was looking at types of occupations people had prior to entering the program. Now we're going to turn this around and look at how do employment rates differ by what types of trainings people got when they were in the program. So this page is sorted by the employment rate. The occupation category is not necessarily what type of job they ended up in, but what their training was for. So we're seeing that statewide, people that got training to be a healthcare practitioner, such as a registered nurse, they had the highest employment rate out of everyone in the system. So about 90% of people that went into training for healthcare practitioner jobs ended up having a job 6 months after. We also have some information on training related employment. This is entered at the discretion of the career planners. And my impression is this data is not necessarily comprehensive. So if somebody goes into training for a healthcare practitioner job and they end up as a registered nurse, that is probably going to be training related employment. But there could also be cases where the job does relate to training, but the box is not checked in that data system. So when you see low percentages for training related employment, that's not necessarily an alarm. That just tells me that that data could be captured more consistently. But this data can be helpful for seeing how are the employment outcomes looking by different types of training. This information is available statewide and for workforce boards. It's also available by program. Note that for some programs, there might not be a lot of data because there might not be a lot of participants in that. As an example, we typically don't see a lot of youth participants going into training for management occupations because that typically requires some more advanced education and training, which might not be suitable for somebody just looking to start their career. But this information is available for all workforce boards and for the 3 Title I programs, so you can see how are employment prospects looking by different types of training. What's even more interesting than the employment rates by training is the earnings potential by training. So this is looking at, by the types of training people received, how much did they make after they exited the program? So this is just showing of those that went through training for management, they typically had the highest earnings. This isn't necessarily saying that those that went into training for management ended up in management occupations, but usually the people that went into management training ended up with higher earnings overall. And not every training is going to be appropriate for every participant. So management, that's usually going to require some industry specific knowledge for what type of business you're trying to manage. It might require some more advanced education and training. If somebody's just trying to launch their career, management might not be a good fit, but it could be a good step up for someone who is mid-career and looking to boost their earnings potential. So this information might be helpful for outreach and engagement with your participants and potential participants for showing This is how much you could earn if you finish this type of program. As an example, computer and mathematical occupations, there are a lot of career pathways for these types of jobs, and they have high earnings potential. So this is a way of looking at what types of earnings one might expect once they finish their training. And these are all quarterly earnings. So it's not necessarily how much they make in a year, but this is weighted by the total hours worked in that second quarter. No, yes, that second quarter after they exited the program. So earnings could be higher if they started their job late in the quarter. But this is just overall how much they earned in those 3 months after they exited the program. Now, in addition to looking at what earnings were like by type of training, we also have some information on occupational mobility. So, of those that go into types of training, what type of job did they have beforehand? And then, of those that went into a particular type of training, what type of job did they have afterwards? So, this page is showing the flow of jobs into different types of training programs. So, along the top right, we select a type of occupation trained for, and then we can see what types of jobs people had going into that program. I'm going to focus on management because that has a lot of earnings potential, but it might not be appropriate for all participants. So of the people that receive training for management occupations, we see that there's a wide range of jobs that people had before they went into those types of training. So about 30% of people that went into training for management jobs were in some category that represented less than 5% of the total. Broad range of them, which makes sense because people that go into management jobs usually need some sort of experience related to the industries they are going to be managing. I'm not going to be successful managing a manufacturing company if even I have an MBA, I don't know how to spell CNC, as an example. So if you're going into managing a manufacturing company, it helps to have some manufacturing experience. We're also seeing a lot of data where the occupational code was not provided. That's indicated by this SOAK not provided category. Interestingly, about 23% of participants that went into training for a management occupation were already in some type of management occupation. So these could be people that are looking to upskill their job. So they might be a middle level manager and they're looking to enter a more senior position. So that's a case where the occupation somebody's training for is something they are already in. Not necessarily that they are training for the same job, but looking for that next step up on the career ladder. And this information is only available at the statewide level because it is highly fragmented. If we were to break out this data on career mobility by local workforce boards, we would have to suppress a lot of that data. And we also suspect that the career flows are going to be fairly consistent statewide and within local workforce boards. So just be aware that a lot of this data is available by individual boards and by programs, but this particular chart is only available statewide. So that previous chart was looking at what types of jobs people had when they went into a type of training. Now we're going to turn that around and look at, of people who completed a type of training, what type of job did they end up in afterwards? So an interesting one here is going to be healthcare practitioners because that's the one with the highest employment rate. So on this graph, we're seeing what types of jobs did people who completed healthcare training end up in after they completed their healthcare training. So about 50% of people who went into training to be a healthcare practitioner, such as a registered nurse or a physician, about half of them, in fact, ended up in the same occupational category that they trained for. About 22% had some sort of job after they exited the program, but we don't know specifically what that job is. The occupational code was not available. It could be that the career planner just was not able to follow up on what exactly that job is. We know that they do have a job because it's based on the unemployment insurance wage record, but we weren't able to discern exactly what their job responsibilities were. They could be healthcare practitioners. It could be something else. About 17% of people who completed healthcare training ended up in healthcare support occupations. So this could be somebody who was a nursing assistant, and then they ended up being a medical assistant afterward, but were still working on getting placed as a registered nurse. So sometimes the occupation that one ends up in is not an exact match to what the training was for. One more thing on career mobility that might help with outreach and engagement is earnings potential or earnings growth. So this is looking at of those who completed a training, how did their earnings compare before they entered the program to after they entered the program? And we're seeing that even when training does not necessarily lead to the occupation that one exactly trained for, we're still seeing some earnings growth. So for those that went into training to become a healthcare practitioner, they usually started out with median earnings of about $3,000 to $4,000 in the 2 quarters before they entered the program. But then their earnings would increase after they finished the training, even if it isn't where they ended up in. So for those that received training for healthcare practitioners and they got a job as a healthcare practitioner, their earnings increased from 3,500 to 14,000. So there is substantial earnings growth for those who ended up in a training related job. There were some that went into training for healthcare, but then they ended up in an office job afterwards. That's not necessarily training related employment, but they still had a successful outcome in terms of earnings growth. Their earnings increased from about 3.8 thousand to about 7.8 thousand. There were some that ended up in food service jobs. Their earnings were lower beforehand. Their earnings were still low after, but there was still an increase. Now, this data doesn't necessarily account for an opportunity cost or the cost of time to be in the program investing in oneself, but we are seeing that even when one is not necessarily placed in a job that exactly matches what the training was for, we're still seeing some earnings growth. So this might be helpful for outreach and retention, showing our participants that if you stick through with this program, you complete your training, your earnings will increase. There's still going to be some mobility, even if that first job after 6 months might not be exactly what the training was for. And then one final section in the dashboard is looking at access and accessibility, or looking at do the participants in the WIOA system seem to match the broader population of those who are unemployed and looking for work? So on this page, we're comparing the population that is unemployed by race and ethnicity to the population of new participants by race and ethnicity. So we're seeing that Hispanic participants seem to be proportionally represented within the program. So they're about 19% of job seekers and about 19% of people who are new to the program. African Americans are more represented in the program than they are as unemployed persons, which could reflect policy priorities. Population that is Asian or some other race is also proportionately represented. Now, white participants typically have a smaller share of the new participants than they do of those who are unemployed, and this could be that they were able to get back on their feet and find reemployment outside of the WIOA Title I program. So there are some cases where there might be differences in the program, but if the program is accessible, we should be seeing more populations proportionally represented within the system. Now, in addition to looking at whether enrollments are matching the broader population of job seekers, we can also see if populations are moving through the program at similar rates. So are those who enter the program matching those who exit the program? And of those who exit the program, are they finding employment at similar rates? So the graph on the left is looking at just the share of participants by race that entered the program. Second one is looking at exits. Third is looking at those who exited and had a job. And we are seeing that each of the bars is looking pretty similar. Sometimes when you look at data, the story is these graphs look different. What's going on? Sometimes the story is these graphs look the same. That's good news. So we're seeing that people that exit the program are seemingly having the same share as the population when they find employment. So generally, we're not seeing any concerns there in terms of inclusiveness in those who are employed after they exit the program. So we are currently in the process of updating this dashboard for next year. So we are currently updating the dashboard. We're currently elbows deep in the participant data for WIOA Title One because we're building the statistical adjustment model, which is going to be used in your program year 2024 assessments. The dashboard data has a lot of overlap with the statistical adjustment model. So once that model is under lock and key and ready for issuing the assessments, that's when we will think about updating this dashboard with new data for program year 2024. So we are looking at having the performance assessments in May as usual. We'll be looking to have this dashboard updated with newer participant data sometime in the early summer. So that's going to be in between when we do the performance assessments and when we release the new version of the WIOA negotiation tool. And with that, I can take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Andy, it looks as though we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So the first one, it looks as though Mark took care of the bit.ly link to the dashboard. Is that correct? Everybody is able to see it? Can we get a thumbs up? Great. Fantastic. And there are two questions in the chat. The first one is, in the current IWDS target pop reports, there isn't an option to run a detailed report that shows which customers are showing up in various demographics data. Does this allow for that?
So this one, unfortunately, would not have that level of detail to see, for example, an intersection of barriers. We tried to aggregate everything in this dashboard to protect the privacy of participants. So, right, this one would not have that level of detail to see this particular participant was unemployed and they were a veteran and so on. So, no, unfortunately, we would not be able to capture that the way this is structured. That's something that we can get from the individual level participant data, but it's not being published on this dashboard. We can work with you to try and get some more custom tabulations on the back end. There's always two separate questions of this, and there's always the first question of, do we have data for it? And the second question is, can we make that publicly available? In this case, we might be able to do something on the back end that gets towards those more detailed questions about intersections of barriers.
Fantastic. And then I have a second question from Thaddeus. This one's kind of long, so I'll try to read through it quickly. Would you be able to share a chart or Excel table that maps the specific IWDS screen/questions used to populate the dashboard? For example, can you clarify how training-related employment is captured? Is it based on the career planner selecting training related on the exit screen, or is it driven by the ONET code of the exit job? Most of the fields are self-explanatory, but I want to ensure career planners are selecting the correct categories. Did that make sense?
Yes, I think Mark is on the line. I think that he could help out with that question. I know a lot about how the data is reflected in the participant individual record layout that gets submitted to the Department of Labor. I am not familiar with the details of how that training related employment data is captured. Oh, looks like Mark is trying to come off of mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me take care of that. So I have to scroll down quite a bit. All right, Mark, you can unmute.
Great. Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Andy, for the presentation today. That field for tying to, um, all right, I think I got my auto working right.
Yeah,
Yep, thanks.
should
Sounds
be good
good.
now. Sorry.
Yep, sorry about that. Yeah, thanks, Andy, for the presentation again and everyone's participation. As far as the ONET code being tied to a job, the real problem with that, and this is a really low number, if you think about it, when we see this, and we get this evaluated by Federal Department of Labor, and we're around 30 some percent, maybe 34% as a state. in reporting that. And the reason is when we do a wage match, um, we don't get the actual occupational code. All we get is the industry or sector. And so we can't plug in an ONET code tied to that from just a wage match. And so if that's not done, then we don't get the match. Where we do get a match is if your career planners are communicating in follow up, and this is a really good reason why you want to have good follow up and continue through till you get some of the questions answered, in addition to provide the assistance they may need during that 12-month period. But if the career planner finds out from the participant during follow up or at any point in time what their job specifically is, they can go in and manually enter the ONET code. And then that's where it gets the match. So some people are able to do that. Obviously, if we're getting around 30 some percent, and that's a national rate. It's not like it's unusual for Illinois. Most of those systems in capturing wage data do not have a specific ONET code map to it. So when we query IDES, Department of Employment Security, to get wages, we just don't get that information back, unfortunately. We're going to, under 2.0, stress and training the importance of trying to get that. I think the real reason that we can't get it and we can't really, push IDS to give it to us is because employers are reluctant to give that, or it's incomplete information because what one employer might call a job and fit into an ONET code might be quite different with another employer, even though it's the exact same job. And so there's still going to be some reluctance from employers to provide us that information, even if we started asking it. And that's how IDS gets some of the information they have from employers. It's just a query to employers. And I don't know what their success rate in getting actual responses are to begin with. We all know how how difficult it is to get polls and responses and all that done unless it's mandated and you get something in return for your response. It's probably going to be very difficult for us to ever update the process to get ONET level data. So hopefully that helps. Sorry about the lengthy response to that.
Oh, I've got a follow-up question on that. Do we know if that training-related employment is that based on an exact ONET match or is that approximate? So if I wanted to train to be a wire feed welder, I ended up as an arc welder, would that still count as training-related employment?
It's all that's why and another thing we'll do when we reach out to training providers and show them through the new ETPL eligible training provider fields and screens in 2.0. It's important for them to list as many occupations as they can rightfully attach to that job, so that if in that case, Andy, someone thinks it's a different ONET, maybe it still gets captured.
Okay.
But we don't want to, we don't want them to just put a list of 50 jobs just because they
Yes.
want to try to get that. We want to be fair because it's information needed by the participant and the career planner to ensure they're getting in a training program that matches their desires from a career perspective. So, we allow up to 5 in current IWDS. I think we're going to have unlimited ONET codes in 2.0, or certainly going to have more than 5. The issue that we'll have to do with providers is that they'll have to give us a hierarchy, meaning what are the most logical and most expected occupations to come from this program. Because when we submit to DOL, only the top 3 in a list of however many make it to DOL. Which is another reason for a little bit of lack of data. Even if you were to get all of your ONET code information from your participant, if it was mapped, the ONET code we got for that was mapped to the 4th in the list of ONET codes, it's not going to get captured in that data element. So, there's some inherent issues. All the states, and we actually just met yesterday with DOL. We meet quarterly with them on what's called a quarterly report analysis. These are non-mandatory data elements that are seen to be helpful in producing better results. And this is one of those that's always there. I think we finally got to a point where nobody asks about it anymore because people have asked enough about it. Why is it so low? And what can be done to help it? But again, every state's kind of in the same boat, and really the only way you're going to improve that is um, through better communication with the participant to get that information and have your career planners put it in. I don't want to speak to how many career planners may know of the occupation and simply don't enter it into IWDS or Career Connect for those in local area 7. But we'll want to, emphasize that the better we can do, the better off, because then it just leads to better results overall and shows that a program is leading to what it's expected to. I think we'd all agree if someone said without understanding what I explained that the results are 34%, most people would go, that doesn't sound very good. But it's not a matter of the program not being effective. It's a matter of the ability to get the information is really just not there.
Yeah, just to follow up on that briefly, I was seeing from the dashboard that of those that went into training for a healthcare job, they ended up in a healthcare job. About 85% of them had the box checked for training related employment. Now, I would think that just from the description of that, that number should be 100%. So that to me suggests that there is a lot more nuance behind the training related employment determination than we might think just by matching the code. And one more thing I'll say on that is that I think that occupation codes are just a lot harder to identify than the industry as a whole. I think that it's pretty easy to identify what the business is doing, but depending on your job responsibility, it might be hard to see what occupation code am I. I don't think I could give you my ONET code, for example.
Yeah, and I think some of that is, people wear different hats. So
Yes,
which code am I going to give you?
that's right.
I mean, obviously there's some that are pretty specific. There's not a whole lot of different welding ONET codes out there. So if you're a welder, I'd probably be able to figure that out pretty quickly if you can say that's your primary, function. But yeah, in some industries and especially the smaller ones, people are wearing so many different hats. How do we do that? And I don't know. Could be a good question to present to 2.0 in development. Can we enter more than one ONET code if we feel like the person's handling more than one specific occupation? And then could that be helped, in managing this and mapping it appropriately? I think we hopefully will anticipate a little bit of increase in our number under 2.0. Career planning hopefully will help that to get those numbers entered, more often. But that's, we'll see.
It looks like Joseph had a question about have there been any data anomalies either in the coding of the data or the interface for entering the data. So there have been some cases where there have been corrections made in the data in the past, and the reason we do that is because we want to make sure we're using the most accurate data as well. So maybe Mark can help me out with this one, but wasn't there a point where we found an error in, I think it was in one of the income variables. I think it was other public assistance where it was just being
Yeah,
reported way higher than it should be. So that looked like the percentage was really high one year in the data, and then DCO OET corrected it, and then the data was accurate the next year. So
right. We've had several of those, and especially when we start using the statistical adjustment model moving forward with program year 2024 outcomes and assessments, we'll want to make sure we're looking at those closely and running those by the little statistical adjustment model work group to make sure everything looks good like it should. One year we had an issue where, in programming, sometimes we don't catch these until we see the after results, but we weren't capturing anything in one element that was working towards the SAM, and it affected it greatly. And the thing is, with that, it was affecting us at the state level more than each local area. And when we went back to the federal office and said, "Well, can we have this reconsidered now that we've fixed it?" We had already found it and fixed it, but it was after the fact of when they completed the assessments. they said, sorry, we don't do that. We won't entertain that. We're not going to do that in Illinois. If we see something that we did wrong, um, that affected your performance positively or negatively, we want to be as accurate as possible. So if we see those, and if you see those, you certainly want to bring those to either mine or Andy's attention, depending on what the situation is. We have I'll just say it blank. We have a poor way of communicating co-enrollments in our system. We don't have a referral system. We're developing a referral system with 2.0 that we hope will help. But again, it's going to be manual entry of tell me that people are receiving benefits from these other programs. And we had a problem with the SNAP program that it was listed as the old food stamps instead of SNAP, and people weren't checking it because people were asking one or the other, and it wasn't getting checked. Plus, there are two places to enter that, and we mapped it to only one of the two. And so when we saw the data, we was like, man, this seems awfully low that we have, this few co-enrolled in that program, knowing that they came to us sometimes from that program. And it's just a matter again of making sure career planners check the boxes appropriately and make sure we get the mapping as accurate as possible. Some of the mapping that we do in our system simply is based on the participant individual record layout, or Pearl, which is where Andy and the team there at NIU pull everything for this dashboard, for the statistical adjustment model. Um, we don't necessarily agree with some of those, but we're stuck with what it is, and we don't think it maps properly because we don't think the definition is what it needs to be. But again, we voice our concerns, and we're stuck with the layout that they give us and give it all 50 states and six territories. So there are going to be some to that, Joseph, some issues where people are looking, going, this doesn't seem right, and it may come back to it's just what we're statutorily required to report, and we can't change that. Yeah, we hope 2.0. We're really working closely with the developers in looking at every single line. There's hundreds upon hundreds, maybe thousands of lines in this Pearl. You can go out to the DOL website and find it if you really care about all the different things that we have to report. We capture a lot more, but there are, like I say, hundreds and thousands of data elements we have to report. Um, and you can go out there and find the definition, and so we've done our best over the years to try to map IWDS to the correct element that we report on, but I'm sure there's some that get overlooked, and we don't catch those. But under 2.0, we're certainly um, really looking at this step by step to try to map it better. Hopefully, it's going to be clearer to the career planner so that they can accurately enter where they need to, so that what we do capture in the new system will be mapped accordingly to the appropriate Pearl element.
All right, it looks as though Reba Graham also has a question, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Reba.
I didn't have a question. I'm sorry. I pressed the wrong button. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I'd also seen that Lee Reese had raised his hand. Lee, are you wanting to ask a question? If so, can you raise your hand again? Looks as though no questions.
It also looks like Viviana was thinking about typing up a question toward the start of webinar. Or did she ever get around to asking that?
Jonathan, the recording will be available. It'll be on the Illinois Workforce Academy within 48 hours.
Yeah, and I think supporting Andy's work here. There's a lot of information here. We got to be cognizant not to overload it, but we certainly take any questions or recommendations for maybe something you think will be helpful. We use our work groups. We've got a couple of them still active to get some of that feedback. But certainly reach out to one or the other of us if you have a question. If it's about the site itself Andy's probably best to respond to it. If it's more programmatic and legislative and regulatory, send those to me. But either one of us can review any request to say, hey, we'd like to really see this or that. And this is really an effort. We've got the iPad system that many people are using when we transition to 2.0, and iPads is the Illinois Performance, Accountability, and Transparency System. It has a lot of the reporting elements that are currently in IWDS available. It's a lot easier to use. We recommend all local stakeholders use that when possible. There are some stakeholders don't have access to it, like board members at this point, and it's only limited to access to those that should have it. So a career planner can only see their participants. They shouldn't be able to see other LWIAs and things like that. So there are limitations to being transparent. But one thing we are doing is becoming more transparent. This dashboard helps you see some of the data that you've never seen before. They've done a great job of making it meaningful, not just a table that has a bunch of information that you then have to do something with. But we're going to continue to move forward with that. We've made some management decisions to become a little bit more transparent. So as we move forward, we're again have some work groups working on that, on what we're going to make transparent, what we're going to share, how we can help all of you become more successful, and give you opportunities for continuous improvement. So again, we really welcome input, um, and we'll have more news on some of that as we move forward towards 2.0. And Tony, I don't know if you're seeing any more questions in the
I
chat
am
or
not seeing
or
any
in
more
the
questions,
Q&A.
which is that we're getting a lot of thank yous. I don't see anything in the Q&A either, so we might be at the end. Any other
Great. Thank you
questions?
again on behalf of Office of Employment and Training. Thank you, Andy, for presenting this, for all the work you've done to bring this to where it is today. A lot of work I know in the background that we aren't even aware of that it takes. And thank everyone else, Antonio, you for facilitating today, and everyone for joining the webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.